Good evening, everyone. Today is Monday, September 23rd. Welcome to Glendale Transportation and Parking Commission special meeting of the day. And let's start with the agenda, please.
Item 1A, roll call. Commissioner Gupta. Commissioner Yakubian.
Here.
Chairperson Kirkjian.
Here?
Commissioner Sahakian. Commissioner Nazarian.
Here. Let's go to item number 2, please.
1B.
Item 1B.
1B, I'm
flag
sorry,
salute.
1B. Flag salute. Let's go for...
Flag salute by Chairperson
Yes.
Kirkjian.
I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Item number 2, please.
Item 2, posting of agenda. The agenda for the Monday, September 23rd, 2019 special meeting of the Glendale Transportation and Parking Commission was posted by Thursday, September 19, 2019, before 5 p.m. on the bulletin board outside of City Hall.
Let's go to item number 3, please. Oral
Item-
communications.
Discussion is limited to items not a part of this agenda. Each speaker is allowed 5 minutes. The commission may question the speaker, but there will be no debate or decision.
We have one speaker on this for oral communication, William Brocus. Go ahead, Mr. Brocus, you have 5 minutes.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment that with regards to the posting of adequate bus schedules on the bus stops and a lack of access to like shade and that kind of stuff at bus stations. I noticed this is a transportation meeting and I thought I would come down and say a few words about that. I mean, it's a warm city, and it's in order to make the buses more useful and more approachable to people and to improve ridership, it would be really helpful to make to keep the buses more accessible, keep information about the buses more accessible on the by perhaps posting information about schedules and routes onto the poles used to show the metro.
Let me ask you, are you referring to Beeline or are you referring to Metro buses?
Metro buses.
Metro bus.
I've
I'm not
noticed-
sure if we have authority, we have any jurisdiction over Metro buses over here.
No.
Mr. Imrani?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We have authority over Beeline, the bus stops, but not Metro. So if these are Metro bus stops, you may want to contact Metro.
Okay. All right.
Thank you,
Thank
Mr.
you.
Brocus. Well, I don't have any other cards for oral communications. Let's close that and move on to item number 4, please.
Item 4, approval of minutes. 4A, approval of minutes for the July 22nd, 2019 special meeting.
Roll call.
Commissioner Gupta. Commissioner Yakubian.
Yes.
Chairperson Kirkjian.
Yes?
Commissioner Sahakian.
Yeah,
Commissioner Nazarian.
Excuse me, we need to just put a motion down for that. So I'll go ahead and move for that motion.
Commissioner Gupta. Commissioner Yakubian.
Yes.
Chairperson Kirkjian.
Yes?
Commissioner Sahakian. Commissioner Nazarian.
Let's move to item number 5A.
Item 5, information only. 5A, report to update the Transportation and Parking Commission on the streetcar feasibility study.
Good evening, Mr. Chair and Commission members. I'm Bradley Calvert, the Assistant Director of Community Development. I oversee mobility, which is currently conducting this Glendale streetcar feasibility study. We came to the commission a few months ago to give an update of where we were. That was essentially our first touch at that point. Since then, we've refined a number of things as part of this feasibility study, including the routes. We have some improved ridership numbers, and we've also engaged in more extensive public outreach as well in order to gain feedback from the community and see how they would use the streetcar. So tonight, we just want to give an update on what some of those elements are, again, diving in a little bit of detail. As mentioned, we were here back in April to present the route alternatives. Tonight, we'll discuss those public engagement results. We had launched a project survey to reach a broader spectrum of the population. We also have impacts to parking as part of this as well, the aforementioned notes that I made just a moment ago, and early cost estimates for this streetcar. Now, keep in mind, this project essentially could have two phases. The first is downtown, going from the Larry's Area and Transportation Center and going up to approximately Stocker. There is potentially a second phase of this that could connect to Burbank, but that is not where we are for the feasibility study right now. That would come at a later date. Some of the outreach that we've conducted, we've presented with the Chamber of Commerce, the Downtown Glendale Association, Go Glendale, and their members. And we recently, or a few months back, launched the project website. And the goal of this website was to try to reach as many people as possible, convey some of the project information, give examples of streetcars around the country and what this could look like for Glendale. The history of streetcars in Glendale, they are not new. We're all well aware of the red cars, and this is a great opportunity for us to kind of reinvigorate that and bring that back to the city. And then we also conducted some surveys and polls and opportunities for open comments as well on the website. And this is just a screen grab from that. We had some great assistance from Economic Development, City Management Office in putting this together. We have our own domain. This is glendalestreetcar.com, so we invite anyone to engage in any of the surveys or polls that we have on there. We're always accepting responses. For that survey, and these results are a little bit dated. We didn't get a chance to update them before we came, but these are more recent numbers than we had taken to council last time. We had 373 responses. Now we've probably inched up to about 500. To put that in perspective, that's actually pretty good performance. Metro and Metrolink, when they conducted their survey to increase Metrolink service, had a catchment of Los Angeles, Burbank, Glendale, Pasadena, a number of other cities, millions of people potentially that they could impact, and they pulled about 2,600 responses. So in a city of about 200,000, which many are not going to participate if they're youth, this is a pretty good response rate that we've seen thus far, and it continues to grow for us. Some of the questions we asked, do you live in Glendale? Over 70% responded, almost 70% responded that they did. We asked if they lived in downtown or if they worked downtown. A majority did not on either one of these. So a lot of the responses we were getting were from those that do not live or work in downtown Glendale, which was telling in terms of the response for support and how the streetcar would be used by these respondents. We also asked, how do you currently travel to downtown Glendale? And over 80% responded that they typically drive. You were allowed to select more than one option here. Walking was the second most favorable, just over 30%, and transit coming in with just under 20%. So most people are choosing to drive downtown right now. When asked if they supported the streetcar, the downtown Glendale streetcar, it was approximately 82% is where we're at right now in support. It's going between 80 and 82 for the past few months. So that same percentage of drivers, about the same percentage support this project as well. We asked them how they would use the streetcar, and we provided 3 options, and then there was an open comment field as well. The most frequent response was access to shopping and dining, and then being able to connect to Los Angeles via Union Station and the Larry's Area and Transportation Center. A number of other comments were submitted as well in terms of using it for daily errands, going to the pharmacy, going to the doctor, things of that nature. We also asked if there was support for the streetcar to connect to Burbank. As I mentioned, that could be the second phase of this study, and nearly 80% support that as well. Again, we're not here to address that portion of it, but just trying to gauge that feedback and if there is support for that to continue on. We asked how likely are they going to use the streetcar, and over 80% either said very likely or somewhat likely. So again, kind of matching that support level, matching the current percentage that drive downtown. Under 10% for neutral, somewhat likely, or very unlikely. So as you can see, there was very good support. The fact that over 60% of those said that they would very likely use this, I think, is a great opportunity to try to remove some of those cars from the road, which is one of the goals of this streetcar, to encourage alternative modes, alternative access to downtown. Now, as part of this, we have developed two route alternatives, one that we call the loop and one that we call the bi-directional option. This is the loop option, which essentially goes from the Larry Zarian Transportation Center up Central, and it continues only northbound on Central all the way up to Stocker before it then turns and comes southbound on Brand. We're still looking at which street it could exactly cross over between Central and Brand. It could be Lomita, it could be Maple. That's something that we're still trying to refine. The white dots there represent the potential station locations, and we'll get into those a little bit more in a moment. And as actually you can see the actual intersections here in this slide: Central at Maple, Central at the Americana, Central at California. All of these being located at kind of key intersections where there's high commercial activity, there's a high number of residents that live there. This route does present some challenges, though, and we had mentioned these before, and I failed to put the slide in here, so I'll try my best to explain that. Essentially what the bi-directional or the loop alternative does is if, say, someone is coming out of the Galleria and they are looking to go back to the Larry Zarian Transportation Center, if they're not from here, they're likely going to go to the first platform they see, and that's going to be that northbound platform on Central. And what that means is they're going to be taken for a ride all the way northbound to Stocker, and then they're going to come all the way back down Brand, not knowing that if they would have just walked over one more block, they would have probably had a much shorter ride. So this loop alternative is not quite as intuitive as the bi-directional. As we'll mention towards the end, there's still some pros to this. There are some cons to both as well. But that's something we definitely want people to be aware of. Prior to working here, I worked in the city of Atlanta on the Atlanta streetcar, and they had to do the loop. They had no other option because they didn't have the right-of-way width. And they really struggled with the ridership at that point because, especially for people coming out of town, it's just not quite as you would expect to use that, and often you can end up taking a ride much longer than you would expect. And some of the most important elements in terms of building ridership are headways and also just that intuitiveness of the route. This is a section through Brand. The top is showing the existing, the proposed there at the lower part of the page. This would be showing the streetcar running curbside going southbound on Brand. This would require the conversion of parking to go from from angled to parallel. And that does come with some impacts. But the priority that we have heard thus far is to maintain the median on Brand. These streetcars could have ran up the center, much like the old red cars, but there is a great affinity for that character defining element of Brand and maintaining that median. This is a section through Central. Again, at the top, existing, bottom proposed. You can see that running curbside on the right side of the image there. This would not impact parking as much. What it could potentially do for us, though, on Central, this is one of the pros here, is that right now our bike lane is on the outside of the parked cars, which is not necessarily building the comfort for bicycle riders to use that bike lane. They're still exposed to traffic. They're exposed to very high volumes and very fast moving traffic, and they're literally just separated by a painted line on the street. This could present an opportunity for us to take that bike lane and move that to the inside of the parked cars, therefore providing that necessary buffer that would essentially give riders the comfortability, the confidence to be able to use this bike lane. Again, no major impacts. This wouldn't change anything about the parking. This wouldn't change anything about the lane configurations. But one of the things we're trying to do as part of this streetcar feasibility study is look for those opportunities for other improvements to pedestrians or cyclists, and things that we can kind of capture simultaneously. Again, highlighting that change in the location of the bike lane. This is a rendering north at Central and Laurel, showing how that would run curbside. This is the point where it's bi-directional. The southern portion of this route, until it hits Lomita or Maple, would still be bi-directional before it would turn into that loop alternative. So looking at some of the parking impacts, that was one of the things that we were studying following our last presentation to the commission. We would lose approximately 50 to 55 parallel parking spaces along Central, and that's because the platforms would need to go in there. They would sit within that parallel parking on that right side, curbside, so we would see about 50 to 55 spaces lost. Along Brand, we would see a conversion of the angled parking to parallel, and that would be about a 30% loss. About 20 to 25 spaces could be lost downtown because of that. Having to convert those spaces, you're taking up more space along the curbside compared to angled parking. We would also have platforms that would have to go in that area as well. Ridership estimate for this first alternative is between 1,400 and 38 riders per day. Again, that's a pretty wide range right now, but during this next phase of the feasibility study that we expect to conclude later this year, we'll see that number refine more and more. Construction costs between $250 to $300 million. Operations would be between $4 and $5 million per year. The second alternative, this is the bidirectional alternative. You can see that south of Lomita, south of Maple, this is still the same. It's bidirectional as it is in the loop, but everything moves over to Brand at that point. Instead of running routes on Central, going north on Central and coming south on Brand, north and southbound routes are both on Brand and then terminating in approximately Stocker. Again, stations, Brand, same locations as in the bidirectional. We would still have the same number of stations, even though we're only on one street. We would still have to have the north and southbound stations, obviously. Section, this is pretty similar to the other one that we saw in this case. You see the streetcar on both curbside, conversion of the angled parking to parallel parking again. Central, same thing. This would take away essentially dedicated travel lanes for cars, but again, the streetcar does share the travel lane, so it's not that cars are prohibited from any of these. The number of travel lanes would remain approximately the same in most cases. And in this case, you can see there's still both 2 lanes going northbound, 2 lanes going southbound. So the parking impacts for this, again, about 20 to 25 parking spaces lost on that southern portion of Central. Again, 30% of those spaces on Brand could be lost to the stations and the conversion of the parking, so that would equate to about 40 to 50 parking spaces up and down Brand. Ridership will be a little bit higher here, and I'll explain that in a moment. There'll be a table here that compares the two, but it's between 1,500 and 4,000 riders per day. And again, you're kind of hitting that really central commercial core, that central office core of Brand. So there's a larger catchment to be had on Brand than there currently is on Central. Construction cost, operation cost, identical, 250 to 300 million for construction, 4 to 5 for operation. So in comparing these two, you can see those first 4 categories there are the same. This is a 2.88 mile route. 16 total stations are being proposed. Construction costs between 250 and 300 million. Maintenance between 4 and 5. You can see that ridership fluctuates just a little bit. It goes a little bit higher on Brand and on the bidirectional route. And you can see in that next row there, it's because of that total number of commercial square footage. It's expected that we would be able to catch more potential riders because of all of that commercial square footage, office space, retail space, commercial services that are up and down Brand. Greater opportunity. Total loss of parking spaces, we'd be looking at about 70 to 80 on the alternative 1, the loop alternative, plus that conversion, that 30% loss conversion from the angled to the parallel parking. In alternative 2, the bidirectional, we would be looking at about 60 to 75 spaces lost for the stations, and then again, that additional 30% for the conversion from angled to parallel parking. One thing we wanted to look at was average ridership and how these estimates, though they are a pretty wide range right now, would stack up against some of the other cities. So we went and pulled a number of different examples all over the country. You can see Cincinnati, Atlanta, Oklahoma City, Tucson, Seattle, Tampa, Milwaukee, DC, another example in Seattle and Kansas City. Now, Kansas City is kind of the gold standard right now. They've really done an excellent job with their streetcar. And that's because they have connected to some of the largest employment bases, some of the largest residential bases in Kansas City, which bodes very well for us. We're going through the densest part of our city where the most people live, the most people work, most people shop. And that's why we can be confident with that wider range that we could end up towards the top. And this is where we fall between that sort of 1,800 and 4,000. So depending on where that landed, we could be just underneath Seattle's First Hill streetcar, which also performs very well, in line with DC, Milwaukee. Milwaukee's also performs fairly well for the area that it's in. So it's reasonable to expect that this would gain pretty good ridership. So some of the next steps, we need to refine those ridership forecasts a little bit more. There is another method that we'll go through to hone that number in and reduce that range. We need to do more traffic analysis. What are the impacts of some of the intersections here? We want to look at a block-by-block analysis. We need to know which impacts are to utilities. We're not expecting anything major, but still we want to dig a little bit deeper. Those can be very expensive overruns if you start digging and you find that there's some things in the way. And then also look at project financing options. How could this be paid for? How could this be funded? Ultimately, we plan to return to council late fall, early winter of 2019 with a final feasibility report, and then await direction from council there before moving on to any of the additional next steps, which could include a EIR or anything else of that nature. So otherwise, I am more than happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, let me,
Just a couple of minor questions on both bidirectional and the loop system. So on the loop, if you can go to the brand section, if you don't mind.
Yes, this is it.
So on the northbound, I guess I'm not quite sure why we're changing the parking to parallel on the brand section.
Let's see, sorry, I have not looked at this in a little while since we were supposed
That's
to meet
okay.
last time, so let's
I
take
think-
another look at that.
I have a feeling this is a section for bidirectional and it got mixed up here. That's my feeling, but
We'll have to take a look at this one again. There was some reconfiguration of lane widths. One of the things that they were trying to do is you can see on that northbound side, there are 3 lanes of travel now, and before there were 2.
Correct.
Is to be able to try to offset the fact that one of those lanes would still have to become primarily used by the streetcar. Still a shared lane. But if we did reconfigure that parking, and you very well could be correct, maybe we don't need to, but it was
Okay.
the opportunity to preserve another travel lane in this instance.
I think so. I think on the whole idea of the loop on coming down Brand, I'm hoping we're not having an impact on the northbound traffic unless you're trying to create that extra lane. Otherwise, as I said, I feel that this is a section for bidirectional that got mixed up maybe here. So that's number one question I had. Let me see. So on bidirectional, I saw that bike lane pushing between the parkings and where's that one? Was that on loop or?
Just move the slide here. That was on the
Sure.
loop option, actually.
Oh, it's on Central, yeah, right there. I'm not sure if I've seen that scenario in many places. Is that common on the other side of the parking?
It is. In terms of building a buffered bike lane or protected bike lane, you see many options. Or you can see a
Okay.
curb, you can see planter boxes, things like that. But this is actually a pretty popular way to do it because you don't have to build any additional infrastructure. It's just switching the two, and the cars themselves become that buffer to the cyclist.
The bike lane is basically trapped there till it gets an opening to get back and forth in the street, right? I mean,
Well, when you get, we would have to look at the impacts of some of the intersections. We don't have a lot of curb bulb outs, so we wouldn't have many impacts. They would still be able to keep going. And just like any other cyclist on any ride, they would stay in that bicycle lane until they hit intersections, if they had to turn right or left. That would not create that issue here. And the nice thing here is that you could actually have that bicycle lane run behind the platforms. So again, they wouldn't have to jog. You see that happen a lot in Portland, is they have to jog the bike lane around the streetcar stops. And in this case, we wouldn't have to do that.
I wonder if in this case it's possible to consider raised bike lane. So you get to the level of sidewalk and then there's a true separation between traffic lane and bike. It's not common again in US at least, but it's something to consider.
And that's something we can definitely look at. We want to see what opportunities we can to make improvements to both pedestrians and cyclists while we're in here. Essentially a dig once philosophy. We don't have to come back and make these changes at a later date.
Okay. And on, I guess on the section on bidirectional, when I look at the central section, that's just south of Maple, right? That's
Correct.
north of Maple Central is not impacted.
Correct.
Okay. Okay. I think those were the major one. I can wait for the rest, yeah.
Can I ask you a question? If we compare both alternative 1 and alternative 2 only in regard to existing Central Avenue. Why is it different? Is it only because we're looking at that common portion? Because the two illustrations are different in terms of how they're currently.
They are. So the graphic that you see here, this would be applicable to both. Because this would be the portion of Central south of Lomita or south of Maple. The other one was showing the impact north of that, especially so we could capture that potential with the bike lane, and that is a different configuration than it is on the southern portion of Central.
And did you get any, obviously, one of the big differences with the alternatives is the lack of a designated bike lane if we're doing a bidirectional on Brand. Did you hear any feedback from the community in regard to the bicyclists or any comments from them on what they were seeking or?
Not on a bi-directional. I actually did a meeting the other day with the Northwest Glendale Homeowner Association, and they continuously brought up the central bike lane as being a challenge. Nobody brought up anything from what we've heard, we haven't heard anything about any bike lanes.
And is there any was there any discussion of continuing that bike lane further, I guess, north up Central?
And Fred, you can probably correct me on this, but that is part of our bicycle transportation plan.
Right.
It's just something we
So
haven't
it's-
gotten to yet.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's in the oven cooking somewhere. Okay, got it. I like it. I make a comment. I'm really, it's just, when you use the word intuitive, that was probably what I was saying. I see the bidirectional on Brand to be a much more intuitive kind of flow for someone who's coming to the city and jumping on a streetcar, and then all of a sudden, poof, that streetcar has disappeared into a different area. You don't see it, you don't know how to get to the other side, and it would really help, I think, with the focus and all those wonderful places. Where do I would like to have seen the city parking one more time for me. Where would that be located, the big one? So people coming into the city, is it going to be an ease for them to be able to park and then jump on a car, like if it were a bi-directional on Brand?
There's not a proposed parking facility that would go along with this. Primarily, the route would not justify it in most cases. Most people aren't going to drive in and then park it at a facility and then go 1 mile on the streetcar. Odds are they're probably just going to go ahead and drive in. So this being a more urban nature of transportation would not come with essentially a park and ride facility. That question was brought up by people at a public meeting regarding if we did anything going out to Burbank. That was brought up there because that's not quite of a dense environment. It's not quite as active, quite as vibrant as downtown. So that was brought up as a question for us to consider if we went into the second phase of this.
So no sense of being able to capture the ridership of people driving in. I mean, after all, part of the whole lure and how this all kind of evolved was this idea of like a novelty of having a streetcar coming up. I would suspect that for families that want to come and visit downtown, it would be kind of a lure for them to park their car and then jump on the trolley and, maybe they don't even get off anywhere, but just kind of go around Brand with their family or do something different. But that's just something to consider, I guess. I would suspect the parking for people. I certainly would do it, but I don't speak for everybody, unfortunately. Do you have any questions? I have it down. Let's see.
It was about a year ago. My server went down at the office, and I was going to buy a server. And when the consultant came in, we were looking at different options, and he offered me different options. I said, I want this one, which is I don't want to have any more failures in the future. And the way he explained it to me was, you really don't need this big of a server, because if you need a pickup truck to move your products, why do you need to get a giant semi-truck? What you're buying is a semi-truck, huge. I feel that based on what you presented, based on use, this trolley is that giant truck, which is going to be way underutilized, especially based on numbers which we got for Beeline during our last meeting. And in terms of transportation, the goal is to get people to use public transportation and to move from point A to point B. Are they going to use what's proposed as a means of transportation? Because, as we said, to get on and off, people need to get to a station to move. And if you get there, whether it's bike, walking, or a car, you use this trolley and to get somewhere. About a year ago, maybe not, I was part of a Glendale team, me and another engineer, Armin Arvazian, we attended the class for San Fernando Valley, what do they call San Fernando Valley Government of something for transportation. We were discussing how to get people to use public transportation. And the question was posed, if an attorney in Woodland Hills, this meeting was being held in Valley, that's going downtown, was this attorney, what will it take for this attorney to get off his car and use public transportation? Because naturally, an attorney doesn't have a money problem. The number one thing was timing. How soon can an attorney get from Woodland Hills down to downtown LA? And second thing to get people off their cars is culture. Culturally, we're cars capital of the world. Are we going to get people off their cars to get to public transportation? And this is not connecting to anything. It's only a small portion of the city that's moving people around. How useful is this going to be? And one thing that we're going to discuss is Beeline and Metro. Are we going to have Beeline, Metro, and the streetcar on the street at the same time? And how they're competing against each other? That's not discussed. So sometimes these kind of ideas are great, and they create sort of they snowballed. They become a force. They force on its own and becomes reality. But we have to look at the use of this streetcar. And the numbers that was said, it's not a lot of, it's not huge. And do we want to put this because it's a novelty? I don't think so. People must get off their car and use this. And if we compare this to Kansas City or other places that we talked about, those are much colder states. In colder states, a streetcar, train, metro is very much a lot more utilized than it is over here. So that's where I'm coming from. And second, how are we going to fund this? We not discussed that. And then, speaking of bike lanes on Central, what was the reaction of Downtown Merchants Association to your presentation?
We had positive feedback from both the Chamber of Commerce and the Downtown Glendale Association.
Whose idea was not to put these along center median rather than putting on a stakeout lane on
The streetcar?
the streetcar, yes?
That came primarily from the desire to preserve that aesthetic character of the median. That was something that both the Chamber and the DGA felt very strongly about. We've also heard same thing from some of the council members, to be able to preserve those medians, preserve those trees, that vegetation down the center of the street.
The only reason I'm saying that because I had the privilege of visiting several countries during this last summer, and downtown, to create more vibrant traffic downtown, why can't we move the bike lane? There's no bike lane on Brand. Why don't we bring bike lane to the center median on Brand? That creates a lot more traffic, a lot more vibrant downtown, and move it off Central. And by doing so, people will walk just like it is on Chandler in North Hollywood. Where the railroad tracks were, There's a bike lane in the middle, people walk over there, there are benches, and it's very pleasant walking atmosphere, and walking, biking, people hang around there, and it's safe, you're protected median. Why can't we do that over here in downtown Glendale?
That is currently not part of our bicycle transportation plan. Some of what we're trying to do there is understand that not every street can have the capacity for all modes. It is a predominantly pedestrian-oriented street. It's also a heavy transit street with Beeline, LA Metro, if this potentially came into play. That it's at a certain point, every street kind of has its critical mass, if you will. And understanding that each street essentially has a certain role that they also need to play. And at that point, we would be trying to fit everything into a single street. And that doesn't always work out so well. Seattle has learned the hard way on that. They've tried to fit every mode they can in, and they've watched a lot of their downtown streets become completely congested, and they can't move anywhere at all for the most part. So that's something that it could be studied. But I would imagine that we would run into some significant challenges, both from trying to protect that character of brand, but also there's only so much room we have to work with in that right-of-way, and can we fit all of these modes within that realm?
No. You just touched upon the coexistence of Beeline, Metro, and streetcar. I mean, has that been studied extensively for them, how to exist, how they're going to coexist and compete with each other and help each other in terms of use and capacity?
There's still more work that we have to do on that. What you could, one of the points you could make is that the headways on this are probably going to be better than LA Metro. So they'd be able to fill some of that gap if you're coming up and down Brand. It's also intended to connect to the transit center in order to take people to Los Angeles. In terms of that overlap with the Beeline, that's something that we would still need to look at as well. Obviously, that's an overlapping route. Is that an opportunity for us to create new routes and reallocate those buses to other locations? Those are things that we still need to look into.
The way I'm looking at it is, for example, is my mom, who goes to Galleria, going to get on one of these streetcars to go to Galleria versus she's going to ride there? And how is she going to get to this, to a station from her place, connectivity? How are most people, especially kids who don't drive, that they want to go downtown, are going to get to these stations from Northwest or Verdugo Woodlands or La Crescenta? If they get into a bus, they'll just go all the way to Galleria or to Americana. If people coming from Los Feliz to Americana or Galleria, how are they going to come? So those are the questions that I'd like to see studied before we move on, and before even council sees any of this. Because once it's in motion, it's in motion.
This presentation has already been provided to council. What I would say in terms of studying neighborhood to neighborhood, that's going to be a challenge. The intent of the streetcar is to not be able to connect every single person to this route and to get them downtown. At this point with this first leg, that's not feasible. A second leg of this, though, could be, or any additional legs that we intend to pursue. And we've heard this in many of the presentations as well. So people will ask us, what about from this neighborhood to this neighborhood? And this first segment is not intended to be able to connect everybody to everything. But it is kind of that first piece of the puzzle of what could be a larger network where we could begin to start to branch off to other neighborhoods and be able to connect through a network. I know for myself, as you had mentioned, a relative to be able to try to connect from one place or another. For myself, I live downtown. This would be a great opportunity for me to stop taking Lyft rides to LA, and I could go down to the transit center instead and hop on the train because I would have a more frequent option. So, I mean, it's something that we look at. Obviously, it's something that we consider. But being able to match all of the needs with a single segment is not something we'll be able to achieve. It's going to take a larger network ultimately.
And one more question. In terms of connecting to Burbank, the second leg of this, what streets are you guys envisioning? Is that Glen Oaks or San Fernando Road, or how to connect to Burbank?
Early to say. Most likely, it would be Glen Oaks as part of the West Glendale Land Use and Transportation Study. We'll take a look at what some of those configurations could be, but without us actually launching into that second phase of the feasibility study, we didn't expect to see some of the alternatives, some of the routes here, so it's a bit premature to say which street that would be on.
The reason I'm asking that, because Metro was here a few meetings ago. They're asking for dedicated bus lane on Glen Oaks and down Central. If you give them a dedicated bus lane, there's no more real estate left.
That is a point we've actually had discussions with our consultant on already. Yes, that may be a dedicated bus lane. That is still our right-of-way. We would still be able to share that space with the streetcar and a BRT in that lane if we negotiated and chose to do so with that.
Okay. Any other questions, anybody? Okay, we have a speaker, Mr. Greg Asturian.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members of the commission and staff, my name is Greg Asturian. Really, I am using a visual to ask questions and make some comments for your consideration.
Excuse me, Mr. Asturian, let me interrupt you. Are you here on your behalf, or are you here on behalf of Planning Commission?
No, I'm not on behalf of any organization
Okay,
or body.
okay.
I'm speaking on my behalf as a citizen.
Thank you, Mr. Asturian.
Okay.
For those who don't know, Mr. Asturian, he is the chair of Glendale Planning Commission. So you're right.
I'm a commissioner
Oh,
as it stands, right?
okay, thank you.
Thank you. And so what I wanted to do is to use visuals to submit some comments for your consideration and ask some questions that one way or other I've asked the council, except this one would be a little bit more in depth. So we're going to talk about the first alternative, which is the loop system going up from Larry Zarian Transportation Center all to Stocker and coming down on Brand Boulevard. Keep in mind this is going to have 16 stops. And the alternative number 2, that packs Brand Boulevard north and southbound. The reason that I put these two together is because I wanted to give you a visual reference with what we already have in the corridor, which is B-line number 1 with 32 stops. Look at the similarities. And then B-line number 2 is almost the same thing. The overarching question here, Mr. Chair and Commissioners, is the following. What is it that we want to achieve through installation of the streetcar? Can we achieve that with the existing infrastructure that we have? Here is why I'm asking this question, because as your staff told you, each alternative will cost you somewhere close to about $250 to $300 million, whereas you have zero initial cost for the B-line, obviously because it's an existing infrastructure. Moreover, if you look at it, if you're looking at about $5 million approximately operational costs per year for both alternatives, and you look at B-line for these two lines, it's only about $1.8 million approximately. So there's a lot of cost savings involved, and the idea is, can we achieve what we want to achieve through the streetcar through the B-line? Especially when we are being told that this thing is going to be able to ride or create rides somewhere between 1,400 to 3,800, or the upper limit of about 3,900. Now, if you look at the B-line ridership today, I don't have to go to Kansas, I don't have to go to Atlanta. B-line right now, today, it's about 1,000 a day. For me to be able to leap from 1,000 a day to approximately 4,000 a day is a giant leap of faith. In other words, we need a little bit more proof of concept. This number needs to be visited more rigorously by staff so we understand that we really can achieve the 3,800, or is it that we can't? Again, the overarching question is, what is it that the street line is going to do that we're not going to be able to get through the B line? This is from a study by UCLA. This shows all of the transportation bills that have passed since 1980, right? And in 1980 was Proposition A, I believe, and then later on this one, and then Measure R and Measure M. If you look at all of these, and you look at the only time that the ridership went up was when in 1980, 82, or 83, when the fares were dropped in half. If you look at the chart, you will see that that yellow line is the congestion index. That has been going up and the ridership has been dropping. That is not good news for transportation or mass transportation. I am going to show you some numbers again from the same study. It says that the typical Measure M supporter is not like the typical rider of a transit system. This study was done on Metro. We can learn a lot from this, right? And basically, the typical person that has voted for Measure M has parking at home and has got parking at work. The reason it is extrapolated from the study that they voted for this kind of measure is because they think the congestion would decrease and therefore they can drive their cars back from home to work, basically. Or if we look at the second finding, between 1970 and 2014, we've spent revenue per mile 46%, it has increased by 46%, but the ridership has dropped by about 6%. And these are kind of stuff that pops in my mind when I think about the streetcar or any kind of other transportation mode. And you're absolutely correct, Chair, that this needs to have a behavioral change component to it. And I don't have that answer, I don't know how. Or you look at per capita transit ridership. November 2016 was about 20% below what it was in 1980. These are not numbers that are encouraging. These are discouraging numbers. I bet you if we can find ways of changing the behavior, we may be able to answer these questions. Or it seems that the voters just vote for transit for reasons other than the transit itself. It could be a social mode of ridership or what have you. And again, this study is by the UCLA. This is another way of looking at it. The bottom line, or the bottom graph, is the graph that is nationally, that you can see it's been steady for mass transit transportation. And look at the one at SCAGS out in California, Association of Governors, Governments, and also Southern California in a whole. It has been dropping. So with all of this in consideration, you really have to make a decision when you make a recommendation to the City Council. What is this desired goal? Can it be achieved through the B-line at a fraction of the cost? What about the decline in ridership? How can we say that this, after spending $250 million, after all, is going to be taxpayers' money, we're not going to have the same decline in ridership? What about the merchants? What about the loss of parking? Has anybody talked to Portos about losing that many parkings, right? Or what about packing everything on Brand? What about that congestion? Have we talked to our residents? Streetcar, B-line, and autos, how much more traffic that would start? Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Asurian. Certainly different, we're looking at the issues from a different perspective, analyzed differently by Mr. Asturian, I guess. But let me ask, do you have any response to Mr. Asturian, as his remark and his analysis?
I'm always nice. What are you talking about? I would say that the ridership forecast, this is a range right now. We know we need to refine and get more detail. That's something we'll get into. And maybe we find that we're only a notch above current B-line, and that may change the conversation. But we may also find that we can capture a lot more. We do know that in most cases, rail will outperform buses on certain routes just because it tends to be more attractive. Doesn't mean that's the right decision. Everyone should look at all modes of transit as equal to one another, but rail does have a certain draw and a certain permanence to people. And there are several examples of where that's worked and where ridership has gone up and redevelopment has occurred. It also functions as sort of an economic development tool in many ways because that's a fixed route that's not going anywhere at any point in time and does tend to attract business and development as well. But otherwise, many of the comments that he made, those are things that we still have to investigate. They're all very valid comments, and those are things that we just need to continue to dig deeper into and continue to have conversations with the public.
Can I jump in and just ask you, I understood the streetcar to be open streetcar. Is that not what it is?
Open as in regards to?
How should I describe it? No, not necessarily the top, but like the sides or, when I think of San Francisco, I'm thinking more like, open.
Trolley?
More of the trolley type. So is it going to be an encapsulated, as Mr. Astorian had put in his pamphlet comparing the Beeline
One of the
with
modern streetcars that was shown in the
Yeah,
graphic.
just basically looks like a train going up and down. How is it being?
We show that as well in that rendering, kind of a modern streetcar. We've heard the same comment. It's early on. We could go and pursue older streetcars, much the way that San Diego has done, and San Francisco and New Orleans. If those are available, those could also be deployed. So what that exact model would look like, that's to be determined at this point. The same could also be said for the overhead cables. Those, depending on the type of train or car that's chosen, those can also be battery powered. There's a lot of different technologies out there where we wouldn't have to have overhead wires. And so those are things that we need to look at deeper as well.
Okay. Any other questions?
Thank you.
Well, thank you. Let's move to item number 5B.
Item 5B, receive an update on the transit route analysis project and receive public comments on the draft proposed service changes for Beeline bus services.
Good evening, Mr. Chair and members of the Commission. It's a pleasure to be here with you. I was here 2 months ago and I laid out the preliminary recommendations we had. In the interest of your time, I don't want to go through all of those again. I will say we went through an additional public outreach comment period, and we made some changes to the proposals, and some we did not change. So I'll talk through what we heard. You have that information in your report. Glendale Avenue, the new route on Glendale Avenue connecting the Zarian Transportation Center to the GCC, received almost unanimously positive comments, as we expected. Anytime you add something, you will. A couple of points were made that we changed the routing a little bit on. When we come out from the transportation center downtown, we're going to go right on San Fernando and then left on Glendale. That gets us some service in the area of the triangle southeast of there. We heard from several people who live there that it's really hard to get to the Beeline or any transit from where they live. That will add maybe a minute to the route, so that's well worth doing. And another thing, we had proposed to run it express once it got north of Broadway, because we have Route 3 coming in there, and Route 7 comes in off Glen Oaks. People suggested that there are a couple of busy stops there, and maybe we should run a limited stop. California and Doran were 2 stops mentioned. So those were 2 of the changes we made to the 8. Along with the 8, we had proposed straightening Route 11, which is the Metrolink Express that connects people from the train station, waits for the trains in the morning, brings them up to the offices on Brand, and come back in the afternoon. Actually, it runs 2-way, and we have some people who use that to access Metrolink in the morning. We propose to keep that on Brand instead of going over to Glendale. It has a stop at Colorado and Jackson. We heard a lot of comments from the people at Colorado and Jackson at the Los Angeles Federal Credit Union. If we had that ridership from that stop matching the number of comments that we made, we heard, we might not have changed it. But in truth, we have 3 people coming up from the station to there in the morning and 4 going back in the afternoon. Over 80% of the ridership on Route 11 is on Brand, and we felt we could straighten it, make it a quicker ride, and a more reliable connection with the train. So we did not change that proposal, but we did get a number of comments from that one work location. Route 4, which winds through Chevy Chase, then comes back on Broadway and comes across. We had proposed extending that to San Fernando Road to make a connection with people coming in from the northwest part of the city on Metro, from the northwest part of the region on Metro. We don't know what Metro is going to do on its next bus proposals. There are proposals around to change the service on San Fernando Road, so you might not have a direct ride to Glendale, in which case that extension wouldn't make any sense. But for right now, we think it's a good way to to encourage people to transfer and get into the heart of downtown without having to go down and then out of the way back to the central part of Glendale. And we are also looking at 15-minute service on that route. It's slightly over 15 minutes now. Route 9, we proposed in the long range to go along Foothill Boulevard and can provide a connection to Pasadena. That was also very positively received. That because of the number of buses involved and the negotiation among the various jurisdictions along Foothill Boulevard, that's in the medium term. But a couple of comments we got about serving Jet Propulsion Laboratory, at least in peak hours. We had proposed to run it straight through and let the 33 which is part of the La Cañada Flintridge shuttle, take care of the folks going up to JPL. So that's something we can think about in the future as we go through. The evening service was very positively accepted. We proposed a draft demonstration projects for weekend evening service on all routes and for weekday evening service on routes connecting to GCC campuses. We had originally proposed to run until 8:30 at the Garfield campus. We since found out their classes run later, so we would propose doing that until 10:15. We're also in discussions with Metro. They have the Office of Extraordinary Innovation is proposing some kind of microtransit for Glendale. One idea we are suggesting is they may want to try evening service as their pilot and let them do the experimentation instead of us doing a Beeline project to see what the ridership is. It would give us some sense. We anticipate we'd get some ridership. We don't know the extent. That might be something useful instead of us spending the money to put the buses out there in the evening, have the microtransit demonstration project do that. That's still under negotiation. But certainly evening service was very positively received. The biggest controversy was on our proposal to combine routes 1 and 2 and operate on Central instead of on Brand. We got a lot of strong opinions in both directions. A lot of people, and we heard some at the last commission meeting, someone was here saying it would be too long a walk for him. We did hear from several people that they wanted service on both routes and they didn't understand why we're doing this. We did hear the opposite from some folks. At one of our focus groups, mostly infrequent riders, they said if we had increased frequency, we'd love it. We'd like to ride more often. We'd like to wait only 10 minutes instead of 20 minutes for a bus. We're still proposing that, and the reason is, if you step back to look at this whole project, there was kind of a reimagining of the Beeline. What would we do if we were starting it today? Would we put the routes where they are? What would we do differently? In my years of working in transit at agencies across the country, I can tell you the best way to improve ridership is to offer more frequent service. If people don't have to look at a timetable, if they can just go out to the route, know something's coming every 10 or 15 minutes, ridership always will increase. That's the easiest way to increase ridership. The problem with this is it's expensive because you have to put more buses out. But here in the Brand Central corridors, we can increase service to 10 minutes on one of those streets, and we recommend it Central because we think it's a better street to operate on, with no cost. What we're paying to run up and down both streets, if we put it all on one street, we can increase the frequency to 10 minutes. There might be a couple of instances during the day where it's 15 minutes between buses because there are rules about drivers having breaks, state regulations. But to me, that was, to be able to do that without any cost. We looked at the cost of if we kept Brand north of Broadway, it would be about $400,000 to increase the frequency. And if we kept Brand all the way down if we kept the structure of the route as it is now and increased frequency to 10 minutes, it'd be about $800,000. So for no money, we can double the frequency. We are inconveniencing some people definitely, and that's a decision that gets made over my head. But I wanted to be sure I explained why we did that. We're not trying to punish anybody or make it more inconvenient for anybody. We think frequency would attract new riders to the Beeline. That summarizes my comments about the changes we made, and I'm happy to take any questions. We also did provide some answers in the report to questions you had asked last time.
I read those. Thank you so much.
I only have one question. When I attend those sort of classes for San Fernando Valley Association of Governments, one thing that I found out that Metro is buying information from the phone companies, AT&T and Verizon,
Yes.
and they're selling information about people's riding habits. Have you been tapping into that data?
We looked at that, and for privacy reasons, they restricted the geographic area we could look at to a census tract, which we would love to have gotten down to the census block group level. The census tracts didn't really tell us a whole lot. We thought we could get more out of that data. It's also difficult to use, and I have to say, I got training and I used it for about 3/4 of a day. It's just hard to go back and say you have to draw the area that you're interested in. It's not really user-friendly. I think they made some changes, but it turned out to be less useful for us than we had hoped. One thing we asked them to do is I said, can you just take a non-residential place like Glendale Community College and tell me where people are coming from to and from there? And they said, no, we can't do that because of privacy issues. We won't go below the census tract. So in transit planning, you really need a little more detailed data to be able to understand exactly how people are riding. So it was a disappointment that we couldn't make more use of that, but the rules were the rules.
They made it sound was very simple during those classes, that's why. And
It
I
did
wonder,
sound very simple, yeah.
I wonder if-
And it, at the regional level that MTA looks at, you can glean some things from that level of analysis. At a city level, it's much harder to do that. The geographic unit is just too big to tell you something useful.
Great. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, thank you.
Any other questions? Any other discussion? Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I forgot to ask you. So what's the next step on this report now with the revisions and everything?
The next step will be to bring it to council, probably in November, to get approval or disapproval of the concepts, and then we would come back probably in January with specific proposals that, we'll need to buy these number of buses, we'd need to do this.
So if everything goes smooth, the time that these changes will be implemented is another 7-8 months down the road, or?
Depending on, if the Brand Central thing is, things that don't require additional buses can be implemented, the next driver pick after we do this, so within a 6-month period. If we need buses, it would be a little longer, but we would hope to be able to do these changes within a year if we got council approval.
And does city staff take care of all the updates to the website, route signs, everything?
There is a piece of the study to look at the maps and brochures that are used. I have a member of my team who's an expert in that, who's worked with several transit agencies. He will be looking at that, but the city would be responsible for the signage, certainly changing the signage.
Thank you.
Anything else? Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Do we want to have staff, are we?
Oh.
Any
Mr.
comments?
Imrani, anything to add? Any new business?
Mr. Chair, we don't have any other staff comments or anything like that. Thank you.
So,
I'll second, yeah.
thank you.
Thank you.